of that wouldn't be there if Black folks didn't build it. You know what I mean? Same thing in Jamaica or Dominica or wherever, because those are all places that we built. We created wealth for, we created wealth for Europe, flat out.
Pretty much.
And that's really our commonality.
So one of the first myths, same thing Niam said is that, our perception when, as an immigrant coming here, you always heard, that African Americans were lazy, you know, um, and it's that was you then you quickly start learning that was all, from the perception and what you knew, you know. I grew up in an era in the island where we're learning about U.S. through media, not necessarily television, but mostly through newspapers, because my era wasn't the area of 24 cable news, where you can now you just turn on CNN or whatever it is because you got access to it readily now, and you can have 24 hours of news about the United States, about Europe, unless you had one of those cool radios and you could pick up the BBC, that's where you got a lot of your international news, and so a lot of and Rashad, because we got two Caribbean nationals on the panel, we would like for you to say Caribbean and then Caribbean.
Now, I told you I didn't know how to spell the word. You got to work with me.
But I'm gonna work with you.
Thank you for reminding me. I'm trying.
I'm gonna work with you. But also, the for us, yeah, I grew up. We're from islands, like you said. We're we see ourselves in our government. You know, we grew up having black prime ministers, black governor, black governor generals, just black people representing black people in the islands. You so coming here and starting to understand, the nature of this country, and just like me understanding that once you came here, you were just like every other black person. So for me, the connotation, the stigma attached to being called a nigger, growing up, that was just so far removed from what your understanding was, and to understand the negative connotation attached to it, so our perception was okay, that wasn't part of our understanding. But you coming here is like, yeah, if you get called that, you're just because you're just like every other black person that's here, and you're gonna be lumped in, because that's how you're seen. You're seen just like every other black person out here. So there's no designation, individual designation. Oh no, we can't call you that because you're Jamaican or you're Asian. No, you black. You're here in the United States. If we want to, belittle you, that's the first quick draw right there.
I'm gonna jump in real quick with you, Ari. One of, I guess, the thoughts that one of the concepts that I grew up thinking was that everybody knew that when you hit American soil, don't make a difference, what place you came from. If you black, you black. That they only see that America only understood black and white.
No, but you learn, don't see it that way because, as Chef Irie said, you're the majority in your country, you know? And I know I mean, if you go someplace and you're the majority, like if you go, you're attending the HBCU or a black school, high school, or whatever, the way that you operate, the way that you thrive is totally different from the way that you would thrive when you're the only brown person in the room or it's one or two of y'all. So it was a culture shock definitely it was a culture shock. And even though I read books and we learned social studies and everything like that, reading something and experiencing something is a whole different thing, you know? So, yeah, like Trick Daddy said, you're still a nigga. Hate to say the word. That's the cold-hearted truth in America. That you, no matter what, from afar, close up, whatever, you're still going to be considered that. But it is a shock. Yeah, I mean, they don't really they show that part in the movies, yeah. But how many of those movies did I watch as a child? Very few. And you read about slavery, but reading as a child, because I came here when I was 13. I read a lot of books. I was a bookworm, but things, to me, is a distant past and things like that. I never really knew the impact, the social economic impact, the psychological impact of slavery on Black people in America till I came to America.
You came to. So I want to ask that. Sorry, were you done, Diane?
Huh? No, you can
Were
go
you
ahead.
done? I'm sorry. Now I wanted to ask Clarice about how she felt about this because we have a common thing in the sense like I'm married. My wife identifies as Caribbean. And when I married her, I was always talking about, this black and black, this, blah, blah. And, a lot of her family does not identify as black, but they look black. So we had a lot of conversations. And Clarice, with you marrying a man that's Haitian, because I know growing up, I always was like, yo, you look like me, you black, right? Like I didn't even think of the differences, but now what you're saying, Niam, and what Chef Ivory was saying makes a lot of sense. Clarice, did you have similar conversations? Are you having similar conversations? Or what's your opinion on this?
We definitely have those conversations. So for me, I can even speak to growing up in the 90s here in South Florida. So what's interesting is that I learned very on that there was this division in the Black community between Jamaicans, Haitians, and then, regular Blacks, American Blacks. I didn't even realize growing up that there were other Caribbean islands because I didn't know anyone in those communities and no one really talked about it. And a lot of that is largely media driven. A lot of it was fear driven. I grew up in the era where, we had like the top 6 gang in Palm Beach County. They were a predominantly Haitian gang. So the rhetoric was stay away from Haitian people because they're dangerous. So I'm like, they all can't be dangerous. Now that's a whole lot of people that just
a whole lot of people.
No, they can't all be dangerous. And then there was also this rhetoric about Jamaicans, stay away from them. They'll swindle you out of your money. They don't work. They just smoke all day. They don't have, I don't know where. And I always questioned because I was Black, but I went to predominantly white middle and high school. So once again, I'm hearing this information about people who look like me from people who don't look like me. And I'm sure that the Haitian and Jamaican students in my school or the Caribbean identifying students in general were getting information about me as a Black American that was probably inaccurate as well. And that caused a lot of division between us. It wasn't until I got to high school and college, my last years of high school and college, that, we felt like, all right, y'all, we all Black, we in this together. Let's try to be friends. Let's try to understand each other. Let's try to come together and form some bonds. That I actually had friends and people that I was close to that were from the Caribbean or from the Caribbean. I'm trying to get it right, y'all. Don't put me in the box with Rashad.
Come on. There's plenty of space here. I got a big box. It's huge.
So that was my experience. I was almost an adult before we actually crossed those cultural lines. And now that I look back, I'm disgusted that we had that much division, that we had, American Blacks at our school. We had Jamaican Blacks, Asian Blacks. We had like a few other islands. I think we had a few Trinidadian people. I had one really good friend in college who was Bayesian. But I mean, just to think that we allowed that to happen. And then, growing up, starting to, get into dating and considering marriage and, meeting different people. I think part of me always knew, especially after college, that I would probably marry someone from the Caribbean, not only because like 1 out of every two Black people I met was from the Caribbean here in South Florida. But because I feel like that
Facts.
was just
All facts.
that's facts. But I feel like there was a spirit I could identify with there. And even meeting my husband and meeting his family, I just have a huge love and appreciation for the Haitian culture. And it's different. I think it's because it's different from my own. You know, we may look alike, but just knowing that there is this cultural background that's a lot to be explored for me. There's a lot to learn there. There's a whole language there. There's a system of how they do things. And we're excited to raise up with this blended culture. I can definitely say that there are moments that are challenging. We have our braving moments where we have to be open, honest about some things. I'm going to be honest. I look at him sometimes, I'm like, so I read this in a book about some practices and the beliefs in the Caribbean. Is this something that this is what y'all
Did I
do?
know about this early? Like, yeah.
Is that you? Is
Like,
that you?
That's you.
I just like
Now,
tell me before
No,
we get too deep into this. And sometimes and I'll be honest, sometimes he gets offended. That's a stereotype. And he walks me through that process, and he's been very gracious. But this is the same thing about me being, Black and from the South. There are some cultural, or there are some beliefs that other people have about us and things that we do, that we all hicks and we just living outside and we just like to go outside and shoot things. Like that's not, there are stereotypes on both sides.
well, we do like to go outside and shoot things, though. That's true.
I was getting ready to say that.
He's about to
James, that is true. That is
That is true.
And let me say this, and Jay can probably attest to this. When we talk about the South, so the South is different portions of this. When people say the South, when you live like up north, like in the sense of like New York or Pittsburgh, South is basically DC and below. But in DC, they don't consider themselves the South. They consider, you know what I'm saying? They talking about like North Carolina.
Right.
And
not Florida. Florida is not the South.
And truthfully, the South's supposed to start at Delaware and Maryland.
That's what I'm saying. It's actually Maryland. It's the Mason-Dixon line.
Ain't no South about Maryland, bro.
But that's the thing. It's weird. Like for me, since I grew up in a military household, we had a lot of biracial kids, a lot of mixed communities growing up in my high school. Not so much in my elementary school, but like in my high school, in my middle school, we had a lot of Black, Filipino, wherever your family traveled from, there's probably somebody from that country in your family. So it was really different for me in that sense. But at the same time, on the other end, I would go into the public sphere and hang out with everybody. After that, I would go back to the hood, which was a completely different experience overall. In like the inequities, I didn't realize. I'll tell you what, I didn't realize in white folks' neighborhoods they had a crosswalk.
Even things like that. Like
I'm saying that because the intersection that I lived on as a child had one of the highest accident rates. Okay, it had a high accident rate. I didn't learn about that until later on. But one of the main things was there was no crosswalk there.
Crazy.
Well,
how do you as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, how do you even process that?
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
About that, I learned in college randomly. I took a random class on like urban planning, the cost of installing like a sidewalk and a crosswalk in a neighborhood and how many millions of dollars it costs. And I'm like, That's insane. So you don't prioritize safety over, I mean, we pay taxes. I mean, even the hood, they still got property taxes. So you're not prioritizing safety in those neighborhoods of color. But even like to piggyback off of that, being from the South, like my mom is from a small town, South Carolina called Barnwell, y'all. Aiken is considered like the city to Barnwell. Aiken is,
Whoa.
I mean, yeah, so if you know anything about that area, it's like population 5,000. It's so small, it's tiny.
Wow. Yeah.
And
Barnwell,
Aiken is small.
yes. I mean, their claim to fame is that they have a Piggly Wiggly. People think that store is like made up. I'm like, no, it's a real grocery chain.
Piggly Wiggly's a real thing. Piggly Wiggly's a real thing. Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like real
I've
Southern.
been to a couple. Yeah, I've been to a couple.
Yes. Even thinking about that, this concept of the hood, like here in South Florida, like when I drive, if I'm in like the quote unquote the ghetto or the hood, like I know it. But it's very much a city, like it's a metropolis. Whereas in South Carolina, well, it's different. But whereas in South Carolina, like in Barnwell, you could be Black and maybe you don't have a lot of money, but you still got land. They still built like these really nice houses. They ain't got no neighbors because they live in the middle of nowhere. But it's still this sense of, ownership. We own this. We own these like 10 acres that we can't do nothing with because we don't know nothing about farming. We just got some acres. We own this huge old house that's probably falling apart, but it's ours. Whereas when you come here, it's like there's no sense of ownership in some of our quote unquote like hood communities. Like it's really interesting to me how you see those differences between like a big city, well, I guess you can call West Palm Beach a big city, and then like those small towns. And my family doesn't realize back in Barnwell, for some of them, that house and that land y'all sitting on is probably worth like a couple million, but because of pride, you won't sell it. And then down here, if I want to go to Tamarind, that's like our like, hood street down here. It's right next to like the water. It's by the beach. You have developers trying to come in and buy up that area, and they're probably willing to pay top dollar for it, but we don't own anything. So you see those disparities between, Black communities in different parts of the country. So when I hear people say, oh, there's so many opportunities for Black people here in America, those opportunities are really relative to where you live. And if you understand like socioeconomic where you live. So that's
Chad, let me jump on this. Because I also feel like that's true. Because when you're, let's say, when you're a Southern country, you think about ownership. But when you're, say, as they say, cityfied, you rather have an apartment. You don't want to fix nothing. That's what the landlord is for. You don't want to cut no yard. You don't want to do anything to take pride and ownership of where you stay at. That's somebody else's job. But if you come from like the country, you grow up doing that stuff. So you take pride in your property.
Mm-hmm.
Word.
You're right. What I'm hearing, guys, and I know I'm gonna let you jump in a second. What I'm hearing is we have a lot of just Black people in America. We got a lot of issues with each other. If you're from the North, you're looking at Southern people crazy. If you're from the South, you're looking at Northern people crazy, and vice versa. But then with Black and Caribbean and Black and African, there's a different level of what we feel is privilege, right? So,
especially if you're from the motherland, you know, the perception there is and towards Blacks here and elsewhere, they think totally different than folks here, because their perception is one of whatever we get. If just give us this much, and we gonna turn that into the opportunity that you never even dreamt existed, because they want to be very self to be able to self-sufficient, and once they get that opportunity, that little opportunity, And as you see in, a lot of these countries, and the perception, I think, from here in the US, from ever since, even still now, that people still live in huts in Africa. Yes, probably maybe, they maybe live in hut style, houses, but but in a lot of African countries, they are so far developed. You go into places, the same monies that you trying to buy this big house and a quarter acre of land, you living like kings in a lot of countries in Africa. We talking, 4, 5, 6 bedroom houses with acres of land and maids and all that stuff, and they're living like kings, you know. So they look is like, well, what's wrong with y'all? What's wrong with y'all? And I meant to say earlier something about something that Rashad was saying. Perception is a huge thing, you know, and coming from the Caribbean, you know, we have our perceptions about the country itself, but until you get here, you start to learn, and nothing is better than actually being in someplace different to learn that. So my first trip when I went to Haiti, you quickly understood that that a lot of the perceptions that are heaped on Haiti is not by people from Haiti. That's from the media and the and America at large, because it's in their benefit to portray that, you know. But when you go to Haiti, yes, just like any place in this world, you have varied parts of the system in different communities. Literally you have the ghetto right like intermingled in the the rich area, if you would, people with money. So when you actually go and visit a place and actually get to see, then it starts to break down your perceptions of what that place is, what that culture is, because you need to understand it firsthand, not just listening to the media or just listen to people say, because oftentimes what people are saying, they're relaying it to you third, fourth, fifth hand. It's just something that they heard and they're just letting you know that too. And he's like, well, and then you start to believe it because it's been said so often that becomes truth. But until you start to go into these places, like for me, you know we have our hoods in Jamaica. Every Caribbean country, you know uh, you know poverty is prevalent. It is. you know but when you go, and I visited South Carolina, I visited North Carolina, I visited Georgia, different places. A lot of the things that you start to hear, you heard, and just watch how people live. When I was in certain little places in Georgia, especially the towns that were closer to Jacksonville, because I lived in Jacksonville, and I knew people and friends, and they came from towns close to the Jacksonville, Georgia borderline, and he's like, wow, you know, country people, are almost like country people, in Jamaica, it's like, they're like us, you know.
Country, bro. Country. Anywhere.
Yeah, he's like, wow, this is really cool, but it's a different, maybe a different type of country. And also, you start to, once you start to to learn about the cultural aspect of the cultural aspects of this country as it relates to black people, and understanding the history. I think the biggest part is understanding the history. Then you start, though a lot of those myths and perceptions become quickly distorted and broken down, because you start to understand where a lot of those sentiments and statements were coming from, and you realize who was making them and how generalized they were. So start to, okay, well, but that's not necessarily true, that's not true, that's not true. Because you're starting to understand the historical implications of those perceptions as you see them.
Right. And
Naeem looked like she wanted to jump in there.
yeah, he kind of said the overview of what I was going to say is that once you get to know the history behind things in the culture, you start to understand it more, and those stereotypes go away. And you guys were mentioning, rural areas and rural hoods and rural Black neighborhoods versus metro Black neighborhoods. And I can take Liberty City and Overtown, for example. Growing up here, I grew up here in North Miami Beach, and on the news, I would just always hear stories about Liberty City and Overtown, all these shootings. That's all I ever heard. So when I became an adult and I start to meet more people, and I had a lot of friends that were from Liberty City and Overtown, every time they had a gathering, they'll be like, oh, we're having a gathering. Like, where is it? Oh, Liberty City? Oh, no, I'm not going. I don't want to get shot. So because I always had that, that's all I knew, right? But then going in and working in the neighborhood, I taught school there, I worked at the newspaper there, and I really got to know the community, and I got to know the history. And to say that, people there, they don't care about the property or whatever the case may be because they don't own it, but they used to own it. And I doing research on every Black neighborhood in Florida, the story is the same. It was a thriving Black neighborhood. We owned the stores. And I say we because I consider myself Black and Black first, and that's what it's going to be, and it's always going to be that way for me. I was raised with that type of pride. I have an African first and middle name. But back to this, it was a thriving Black neighborhood, and we owned everything. And the story is the same somehow. Liberty City was the crack era. In Overtown, they wanted to build all of these highways and these roads and all these things, and they push us out. And it's in other parts of Florida, there was, Black people were successful because they worked building the railroad, and then eventually they pushed us out. So the story is the same, and then it trickles down generation to generation, where we might, Caribbean American people were like, oh, why do they want to live that way, or why they're lazy or whatever. There's certain things and certain cycles that you can't just break. You need to have a mentor. You need to have, if your mom can't read at a second grade level, how can she teach you to read at a third grade, right? And teaching in school, a school that was across the street from the pork and beans, there were kids that couldn't even spell my or it, and they were in the fourth grade. And if you look at their life, the things that they have to deal with on a daily basis, there was no way that they're going to be able to focus on school, because people have to be you have to be like 10 years old and be worried about, am I going to get shot? You know what I'm saying? When am I going to see my dad who's on drugs or whatever the case may be? And this is not a stereotype. This is a class. There were 30 kids, and many of them didn't have both of their parents. We already know how that impacts them. And then you have to deal with the constant violence. And two of them were wards of the state. Like the little girl that was the worst child in the class, that would act out every day. When I told her that I loved her, that was the first time she ever heard that. So it's just the fact that it's not just a stereotype that people with Caribbean American people like to look down on African Americans because they feel like, oh, you could do more. You could change your situation. But sometimes it's not that easy. It's not that easy. You have to find a way out. You have to.
One of the things I always admired about Caribbean American folk is that, and African folk as well, is that y'all had a history. Our Rashad just said multiple levels of complexity. Naam, you hit on it. You're so right, man. Black Americans, we didn't have a history. The only history we had, common history, was a history of pain. We had, the history of coming out of slavery and achieving. And then there's a history of everything they achieved. It constantly got erased. So Black Wall Street, right? What happened in Rosewood, what happened in North Carolina, what happened in so many Black communities where we had built up and then they erased it all. And then as soon as you build up again, they come back and erase it all again. That was what the crack epidemic was about erasing gains. You know, the housing crisis that we just went through in 2007 erased gains. You know, Black people never had a common history. And I bring that up because the strength that we see y'all draw from in just having pride in where you come from. Listen, Carnival come, what flag you repping? That's a big thing. We see that and we're in awe of it because we never had anything to be that proud of. Most Black Americans ain't repping the American flag heavy. We've never had anything except for a block or a town. There was no common history. So I think that as you talk about levels of complexity, as you talk about things, you're right. There is I think a lot of the stereotype and division also comes from the fact that we are jealous of y'all in a certain way because Caribbeans have such a rich history and you're united and you know where you come from and you have a place to go if you want to leave this crappy country sometimes.
Man,
Yeah,
they
I
don't
wanna-
want us.
I
They
wanna-
don't want us.
I ain't
vote-
finna go
They don't.
nowhere.
They don't want us there.
I got a question I want to ask for Irie and I. Have y'all ever found that white folks look at y'all as per se like African American, but then when they find out you're Caribbean, they treat you different. Like, oh, you're not one of them. You're different.
Oh, wait, guys, hold on. I'm sorry. 1 second before. Can you put a pin in it? Clarice has to jump off early. Can we just give her the opportunity to put some closing thoughts and then come right back to that question?
Yes, please, Clarice.
I know. I
Clarice,
apologize, but I have to leave you guys. This is a riveting conversation, but I wanted to say thank you for including me. And I think that we need to have more of these conversations in our community, especially because right now, you know, today is National Voter Registration Day. We are getting ready to hit an election that's going to be critical for our Black communities. And I think it's important that we try to unify on some of these topics and issues. And the only way we can do that is if we're willing to internally dismantle some of these stereotypes, debunk some of these myths, because we need more camaraderie. We need to be able to come together more, not just in terms of politics, but community organizing. We're talking about buying back the block and things like that. That can't happen if we're not all on one accord. So I appreciate you having me as a guest on this podcast. You know, I'm just curious if we're going to continue this conversation. Chad, you gonna hook something up? I don't know how you're going to do it. I don't know how we're gonna get everybody together, but this was good, and I think it's necessary. And I gotta go do homework, y'all. My little teammates for my dissertation group are like blowing me up. But
go knock it out. Go knock it out, doctor.
Get that done.
but have a great night, everyone, and just thank you. And I'm looking forward to having more of these conversations in the future.
Oh, doubt.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll let you know. We tend to have part two. So the bridge is
Go
Good to know.
Go ahead.
All right, night, y'all.
All right. Good night,
Night.
Clarice. Thank you again. All right. So y'all can jump right back in. Thank you so much for pausing. So that question was addressed to Niam and Irie.
I was gonna piggyback off of that. I just wanted to interject. I was listening to a talk, a conference, an interview with Malcolm X, and he actually spoke to that same point. He said, "There's no reason a black man in Alabama by the name of John Smith is getting harassed and mistreated, to whereas a guy by the name of Allah Muhammad or whatever you decide comes to the same town, same state with an accent and gets treated differently." You know, so that's something that obviously needs to be addressed and handled.
Good segue. Yeah, Niam, Chef.
But to answer your question, your James's question, yes, I have experienced that sort of, people making that marked difference because you're from the Caribbean, and a lot of it, some of it because they've, a lot of those people, they traveled, to those islands, and so their perception, is basically their limited perception is based on the limited time that they've spent, when they've traveled and stuff like that. So they feel like they know everything, and they know you, and but they don't. But when I come here, um, all you gotta do is feel like you step out of pocket, and you get treated just the same, because that goes out the door. It doesn't matter if we because we were from Jamaica, especially in this political climate. They don't give a rat's behind about that anymore. You one of them. You're just like everybody else. But yeah, and that's kind of crazy to me. Because they all want to go, oh, you're Jamaican, you're Asian, you're blah blah blah. We love your food, and it's like, oh, cool, awesome, yeah, righteous.
We love your food and your
Yep.
music.
Yeah, we love that
Yes.
chicken.
And
We like that.
you're Jamaican and the weed. Love the
Yeah,
ganja.
yeah, that weed. Like the perception. Everybody that grows up in Jamaica smokes weed. Okay, no, not everybody in Jamaica smokes weed, but I mean, we get into our adult phase, and many of us, have explored, certain things. Yes,
I was gonna say, Irie, with the cigar in your hand. With the cigar in your hand. As you
Yeah, I was looking at that chest and looking like he got a big one in his hand.
I was like, not everybody from Jamaica smoke weed. He got a big cigar in his hand.
Hey, but no, so, and that was one of the biggest things when I first came here. It was like, oh, you're Jamaican. So, yo, man, you got some weed, you smoke weed. The conversation always went to that. Because where can I get some Jamaican stuff? And I was like, sometimes you wanted to respond, sometimes I didn't. Most of the times I didn't respond, because I'm just looking at them. I'm looking at people like, you're stupid. And so I refrained a lot of times, because I know a lot of the things that they're saying, is coming from a place of ignorance, because they don't really know. And just goes back, to saying, you in order for you to not feign ignorance anymore, is to become educated. But most people are not willing to take the initiative to become educated on things that they deem not important to them. Okay, so to learn about Caribbean history or Caribbean peoples that's not a priority. You know, whatever and what I find in this country is that anything outside of these borders is not necessarily a priority. Anything that's in if it happens outside of here, that's not a big deal. You know, and that's when I would wonder how many people. I think we spoke about this the other day. How many people in the United States actually have a passport, and then you break it down. How many people who actually have a passport actually use that passport to go someplace outside of these borders? So until you've done any kind of traveling outside of these borders, then I think that will start to break down some of, I think, the stereotypes and enhance the education, if you would, of people outside of these borders.
Let me. I was gonna jump in right here real quick and just make a quick statement. Black people and languages. That like for me, I thought black folks spoke English, and I thought black folks spoke English, and if you was from Africa, you spoke African. I really ain't know much about the different languages. You know what I mean? That was something that was really eye opening to me growing up, and then really having the opportunity to travel. You know what I'm saying? Is black folks can speak 4, 5, 6 different languages. You know, and so that was something I know for me, especially as an adult, traveling and going to different countries, and like, yo, people talking to me, the black folks talking to me in Spanish and Portuguese, and English was the last language that they decided to speak. And, that was eye-opening, but it was also an awesome experience.
But it's also, so when you look at the peoples from the
Gullah Geechee.
and
Yeah, the Low Country, Carolinas.
yeah, low country, but understanding, the language that's spoken there, and when you compare that, as a Jamaican, to, even though it's not very prevalent or it's dying out, that in our culture we were still some people do still speak some of the language from Ghana. Not a lot. There's a community here in Jamaica that they still maintain, certain, rituals. So there's certain people that still speak, the language. There's, in Jamaica, the Maroons. There's Maroon Town. There's, the elders. A lot of those people they're dying out, and some of the young people are still trying to maintain that. So understanding that, yes, we speak lots of languages, is not something that should be like, oh my God, this is so new. We, and even here, though, because the slave master didn't want us to speak nothing else but English. So, a lot of that stuff, quickly died out,
Well, to answer the question for me, my experience is a little bit different. With Chef Irie, first of all, he's a celebrity, so people treat him different. But but yeah, so Caribbean, yeah, white people do approach me differently when they know that I am from the Caribbean. And for several reasons, like he said, it's kind of like I'm exotic, first of all, because I'm from this place. Barbados is not as common, it's more common now because of Rihanna. But before Rihanna was around, nobody knew. That's why a lot of islands, people that are not from Jamaica, Trinidad, or Haiti don't really identify their islands, because then you have to go through a whole explanation. And who has time to sit down and educate somebody the whole time, and they're never going to get it unless unless you go through a map or whatever. For the most part, that's how I felt. But what I was going to say is, so you're exotic, so now they want to know more. Oh, how is it there? It must be beautiful. Is the water there? What do you eat? Things like that. But then on top of that, the language, as you guys mentioned, is different. And, the English is different. The English is different in Miami than it is in Georgia, than it is, the language, the twang is different in New York or wherever you go. And then when you have an accent or whatever, it's different as well. So then they start to see these different things that they may, stereotypes that they have of Black people, especially when they have, like, if I'm a Black woman, it's obvious, and I'm dark skinned. When they when they present dark skinned Black women on TV, or in general, it's like a hoochie mama or whatever, somebody who's loud and quote unquote ghetto. But when really and truly, not all Black women are like that. But even if a Black woman is loud or whatever the case may be, they're just cultural differences that make you speak a different way or act a different way. And is these stereotypes or whatever, or the media make it unacceptable or whatever. So then when you speak different, now they start to look at you different, like, oh, you don't speak like that. And this is me often being in the room as a journalist and being one of few or the only Black person in journalism school, one of few are the only Black person. And then especially when they realize, oh, she's smart, she's getting A's, she knows what's going on, and they'll be cool with me, quote unquote. And so I have experienced being treated different than someone who's African American. But I can say that, Black people, Black African Americans treat, I've had mixed reviews, but mixed receptions, but African Americans have treated me better than other Caribbean people have treated me. You know what I'm saying? One thing that I feel that I get from African American people is that they, even though it doesn't seem that way, and maybe because we're in the South, they love each other. I feel like it doesn't come off that way, but they would know, like I live in Miramar now, but if I lived in another community that I know is Black, and especially in the South, you'll know your neighbor, talk to your neighbor and things like that. And yes, when you're in the Caribbean, it's like that too, but there's a misconception that it isn't like that. That, you know, African American women aren't friendly and always gonna have an attitude or whatever the case may be. But Caribbean people are known for having good hospitality because, you know, they associate it with tourism and things like that. So yeah, my experience, I have been, you know, I do get a warmer reception sometimes when they realize that. I've been told, you know, I thought you were going to be ghetto. This happened to me. It's happened to me on dates. It's happened to me in general. You know, so because of the fact that I'm not only a Black dark-skinned woman, I'm a prototype of a, you know, I'm curvy and things like that. So that concept of what you see on TV or whatever and how it presents people is like, they kind of get like, oh, they feel more warm to me when they realize, oh, okay, I'm not this stereotype. And that could be for anybody, Caribbean or not, that's Black, that's a Black woman, but it's a different experience when you're a Black woman versus a Black man, sorry to say. But, you know, when this,
we know. We know, completely different. Yeah, we got
reasons, but
y'all level of pressure is completely different. Completely different.
yeah.
We know. We don't always say it in public, but I'm going to attest for the guys. We know. And
then, you know, when you talk about being objectified as well, you know, so that comes into play too. So there's a lot, like we've been saying, there's levels to this, and but the answer is yes. The answer is yes for me. That I'm treated different, and I'm treated different by my own people. I'm treated different by African Americans sometimes, and I'm treated different by other Caribbean people, even people from my own island. Be like, oh, you know, because there's a lot of classism in the Caribbean. So, oh, she's one of those Bajans that, you know, are more suburban, you would say, you know, and you know, so she's, you know, in Jamaica they say uptown or whatever. And as in my field, working in my field and being in communications all of my entire career, because even before I was a journalist, I used to work at a call center. I was a supervisor there to talk to people from all over the world. I'm a person who could blend in.
That's how we met.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Blend in anywhere. I can blend in anywhere because I know if I want you to talk to me, I have to talk to you in your language. If I want you to open up to me, you know, when people understand you more when you talk to them in their language. So I'll end it with that. But that's just been my experience.
Nah, that's what's up, man. I mean, you know, we don't have accents here, but even as Black people, and James, you know this, we get treated differently depending on how we use our grammar. So when we're code switching, there's one way we're going to talk when we're in the office. There's a whole nother way we're going to talk when we're around our peoples. And, you know, language, accents, all of that stuff does make a big difference. I know from New York for the longest time, when I would hear some Southern people, I was like, man, they slow. They country. Like the first time I heard some Southern rappers, I was like, yo, what is going on with these country ass Negroes? You know, it's language. It's another thing. And we have to start wrapping up. So I wanted to just put it out there that what was interesting to me about this whole conversation is how similar we actually are, right? How it's all of the differences, the myths, they all almost boil down to perception. You know, a sense of just based off of where you were raised and where you come from, your perception is slightly different, but the struggle is real for all of us. And I think we're all just trying to come up And unfortunately, we've allowed, and maybe not so much anymore, but I know when I was growing up, we had allowed a lot of what we saw in the media and a lot of just misinformation to color our opinions of each other. But we really are very, very similar, whether you from the South, whether you're from the Caribbean, whether you're from Africa, we're really very similar as Black folk. So that's my closing thing. We got to wrap up. What we normally do, Diane, just so you know, is we give everybody a couple minutes to say their last thoughts as we wrap up. So we're going to do that. You are our guest, so you will go last. Right? We let you close out for us. We're going to rotate clockwise on the screen. So that means
that means I'm going first.
You're first.
You're gonna take it. Yeah, and real quickly, can anybody speak to this Supreme Court situation as a Black person in America in your wrap up?
You're trying to add 30 minutes to our whole conversation.
Yes.
We
can talk about that when we end this. And
yes, because I'm freaking out about it. I'm freaking out.
But we'll talk about this when we end this.
He's just about to get a third. It is what it is.
But let me go ahead and start this wrap up. First, let me say there is a part 2 because we didn't cover enough that we needed to cover, and for us, I'm gonna make this even better. So I'm not gonna give my remarks. I'm gonna wait the next week to wrap me up.
James has lots to say. Yes.
Well, that's good because Chef Ivory, you next. So
oh shit. Damn. I take a lot of pride in being who I am, not just being a Caribbean national, but being Jamaican. Rep it anywhere and everywhere in the world that I will go and have gone. So being Jamaican means a lot to me. It is part of what pushes a big part of what I do as a chef in terms of the cuisine that I want to represent and highlight and feature. So it gives me the opportunity to tell my story. But I understand that my story encompasses more than just what it means to be Jamaican, because I've learned and I've interacted and I've met people's Black people from here, Caribbean people from here, African nationals here. So that drives, my sort of conversation in my chosen career field now. But understanding that we are all similar. We are all different in a lot of ways, but we are very similar in a lot of ways. And I think we have to start understanding more of that on a more foundational, level. It can't just be so generalized that we keep glossing over it. Oh, you're Caribbean, blah, blah, blah. I think we, especially the whole dynamics between Caribbean people and African American people. And I think, you see a lot more integration, I think, because of the younger people, whether it's the millennials or the people coming up, from, after millennials, because of the exposure in communities. And a lot of that is because one of the food and cultural aspects that are represented in the country, Jerk Festival, Carnival, other food fairs, reggae concerts, soca concerts, all that stuff. People are now getting the opportunity to experience Caribbean culture on different levels, and a lot more people, I guess, now you live in neighborhoods, maybe your two next door neighbors could be from different countries in the Caribbean. You know, you might live in a neighborhood that you think is predominantly one thing, but you, oh wow, there's so many Caribbean nationals. So I think we really just owe it to ourselves to go out there and learn, embrace, the education that we're setting, the journey that we're setting up on, and just embrace the whole one people. We all came from one place. We all came from one place. We all just got dropped off in different places at different times, but we are from one place. And our journeys have been different, but we need to embrace our history, the history of our journey.
Rashad?
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you there, Ari. My thing is, we just need to continue to build um, with the history, and more so on the history piece, like Black folks from America, um, being here, for generations. One of the things that I think is really important to our growth in this political climate, and that will really help to unite us, is accepting our past. Okay, there's a lot more in our past besides just slavery. Accepting, yes, we there's things that we've overcome. We've had hardships and things like that. But to say, look, we built the White House, we built these different structures. We were the carpenters, we were the designers, we were the shoemakers. We grew the rice in South Carolina. We knew how to grow the cotton because that's stuff we did back in Africa. It wasn't that white folks taught us how to be agriculturalists or horticulturalists. Those are traditions and things that we brought from our native country, right? And the more we're able to accept that and grow with it, the more we'll be able to unify with Black folks from all over the world. It's just really accepting our past and knowing that we have a culture here, whether that be from wherever we're at in our country. No matter whether it's New York or Miami or wherever. You know what I mean? And as we start to accept that more, then we'll do a lot better. And be more cohesive in that whole process. Kate, your turn.
I'm with it, bro. I'm listening to both of y'all, man. This is, y'all be getting me at the end of these wrap ups. Y'all be having me in my feelings. I be thinking a lot. That's why I'm gonna let Niam go, because I know she gonna take us home with it today. I feel it.
How dare you cop out? How dare you?
I said my wrap up. I did mine earlier. The whole perception, that was my piece. I was talking about perception.
Yeah, he went first.
I got you, Bill. He tried to slide it in there. It's all good. It's all good. We're gonna let it be. We're gonna let it be. I'm gonna need more than 10 seconds from you next week.
So, Miss Niam.
Okay. So obviously the theme for tonight and the overall sentiment is that we love each other and we're one, right? And we should really focus on that. We should focus on uniting, especially during these times when not only we're facing a pandemic, something that we've never faced in the last couple of decades, and now there's an uprising as well. So we need to unite, and I appreciate having this conversation, and I hope that it stretches far and wide, and that people can start having these same conversations with their neighbors, and that we can build on this, and we could be more prosperous this way, and we can educate ourselves on the history. And we put aside the categories, I know in general, naturally, as human beings, we're going to judge each other, but let's just focus on someone as an individual you know, because everybody's different. Your personal experiences are all different. Your environment is different. And these, and the traumas and everything else that you go through are different. And these are the mechanisms that make you who you are. And if you try to get to know someone for these things and try to understand them, then you would understand not only their positive attributes, but all of their faults as well. And acceptance is key. Acceptance is key to happiness, is the key to everything else. Once you accept somebody for who they are, once you accept the situation for what it is, then you can find peace. Drop mic.
Drop mic. Well said. Well said. Round of applause.
Bam.
Boy, she did that. She good. That girl good. You know what I'm saying? She just came through and just blazed it. Yo, that's what it is, man. You know, so for all my people watching, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. This has been another episode of The Bridge. This is your weekly barbershop talk, King Talk. But we got a lot of queens on here. You see how they came through tonight and they set this thing off. As always, we're going to give you a whole lot of tomfoolery, but even more wisdom and advice. We're giving you digestible things that you can take and incorporate into your lives. We're always trying to talk positivity and uplifting to the Black spirit. That's what this is about. It's literally about being a bridge. So tonight's episode, we wanted to make it a little less serious. We know we've been killing you over the political speech. And as I hear from James, we have a round 2. So next Tuesday night, you can tune in at 9 p.m. on You're Plugged In, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitch. I think we even have another one. I mean, James got us streaming on all kinds of platforms for all 10 of our followers. But we'll see you guys next week. We thank you for being here. It's another episode of The Bridge, and we are out. It's The Bridge.
All right.